The 13th of September 1987, in the bustling city of Goiânia, Brazil, two men ventured into the desolate halls of the abandoned Instituto Goiano de Radiotherapy hospital, driven by a lust for valuable scrap metal and machine parts. Little did they know that their quest for riches would unleash an unspeakable horror upon the unsuspecting populace. Their reckless actions would set in motion a catastrophic chain of events, leading to one of the most terrifying radioactive contamination incidents the world has ever seen. The consequences of their greed would be felt for generations to come, and the innocent would suffer the consequences of their unforgivable folly. In 1985, the private radiotherapy institute that housed a state-of-the-art hospital was abandoned after operations were relocated to a modern purpose-built facility. However, despite the move, a highly dangerous radiotherapy unit was left behind. It contained a potent capsule of radioactive cesium chloride salt, which remained forgotten and neglected, a ticking time bomb waiting for its moment to strike. Despite being aware of the existence of this highly valuable and hazardous piece of equipment, authorities were unable to remove it from the abandoned building due to an ongoing dispute between the building owner and the hospital management. The property was deemed unsafe and was strictly monitored by security guards. However, fate had a cruel sense of humor in store for the people of Goiânia. On the 13th of September 1987, the guard who was scheduled to watch over the property called in sick, leaving the building unguarded and vulnerable to the imminent threat of disaster. It is a darkly ironic twist of fate that the guard's reason for being absent that day was to take his family to a special screening of the light-hearted comedy-adventure movie Herbie Goes Bananas. In a stroke of misfortune, no guard was stationed at the abandoned hospital when Roberto dos Santos Alves and Wagner Moto Pereira decided to trespass and dismantle the radiotherapy unit. With no regard for their own safety, the men were solely driven by their desire to extract the valuable source, oblivious to the radioactive danger that lay within. Unbeknownst to them, their reckless actions would have dire consequences, exposing them to the lethal effects of the radioactive material. Their lack of knowledge would prove to be a deadly ignorance, leading to one of the worst radioactive contamination incidents in human history. After successfully making off with the radioactive source, Roberto and his accomplice began the process of dismantling it at Roberto's residence. However, it wasn't long before the effects of the material began to take their toll on the unwitting thieves. Soon after their exposure, both men started exhibiting alarming symptoms of radiation poisoning, including bouts of vomiting, diarrhea, and dizziness. They even developed severe burns on their hands where they had come into direct contact with the radioactive substance. Despite the signs of impending danger, the two men pressed on with their attempts to dismantle the capsule. Their reckless determination was further compounded by the misdiagnosis of Wagner's condition. On September 15th, Wagner visited a local clinic where he was mistakenly diagnosed with food poisoning. However, this was hardly surprising, given the fact that the clinic staff had no experience in dealing with radiation-induced illnesses. Meanwhile, Roberto remained fixated on his goal, continuing to work on the deadly capsule. In his ignorance, he had no idea that he was about to unleash radiation that would soon lead to widespread contamination. On September 16th, Roberto managed to punch a hole in the capsule with a screwdriver, unleashing a pulsing blue light that glowed from the lethal radiation contained within. Despite the obvious danger, Roberto was inexplicably drawn to the glowing substance and used the tip of the screwdriver to scoop out some of the radioactive salt. He even attempted to set the substance on fire, mistaking it for gunpowder. Thankfully, Roberto's attempt to ignite the salt proved futile, sparing the surrounding area from the possibility of an even greater catastrophe. However, the danger was far from over. On September 18th, Roberto made the decision to sell the capsule to a scrapyard owner named Devair Alves Ferreira. Unbeknownst to Devair, the blue glow emitted by the radioactive salt was not a sign of magical properties, but a warning of the deadly radiation contained within. Ignorantly believing the glow to be a good omen, Devair took the capsule home and proudly showed it off to numerous friends and family over several days, oblivious to the danger he was exposing them to. On September 21st, one of Devair's friends managed to extract more of the radioactive material from the canister. Ignorantly believing the glow to be a mystical phenomenon, Devair once again distributed small portions of the radioactive salt as gifts to his unsuspecting friends and family. One of the people who received a gift of radioactive salt from Devair was his own brother, Ivo Ferreira. Ivo brought the salt home and gave it to his daughter, who played with it and even applied it to her skin like a cosmetic. She also ingested some of the salts with her food. Meanwhile, on September 25th, Devair sold the remaining radioactive material from the capsule to a second scrapyard, continuing the chain of unwitting exposure to dangerous levels of radiation. At this point, Devair's wife, Gabriela Maria Ferreira, was already gravely ill, but it was she who eventually became aware of the danger. On September 28th, she retrieved the canister from the scrapyard where Devair had sold it and took it to a nearby hospital. After Gabriela Maria Ferreira brought the canister to a nearby hospital on September 28th, doctors identified it on September 29th and alerted the authorities. They promptly took action to contain the incident and initiate cleanup operations, which were beyond extensive. Numerous houses had to be demolished, and items from many others were disposed of after being found to be contaminated with radiation. The floors and walls of some homes were treated, roofs were washed, vehicles were seized, and some were destroyed. And 5 pigs were euthanized after they were found to be contaminated. A total of 112,000 people were examined for probable contamination, and 249 of them were discovered to be affected. With suitable treatment, the majority of them recovered completely. The slight amount of radiation they had absorbed resulted in just a small rise in their chances of developing cancer, but not everyone was so lucky. Those who had been in close proximity to the radioactive materials suffered greatly. Roberto dos Santos Alves, who had taken the source from the hospital initially, had to undergo amputation of his right arm due to severe radiation burns. His accomplice, Wagner Mota Pereira, also lost several fingers. Despite their involvement in the incident, Roberto dos Santos Alves and Wagner Mota Pereira were not charged in the civil suit that ensued. They received relatively light consequences compared to others affected. On the other hand, Edmilson Alves de Souza and Israel Batista dos Santos, who worked at Devair's scrapyard, suffered fatal internal injuries due to exposure to radiation. They both perished about a month after being exposed to the radioactive material. The youngest casualty was Leide das Neves Ferreira, the 6-year-old daughter of Ivo Ferreira, who had played with the radioactive material and even added it to her food. Devair's wife, Gabriela Maria Ferreira, who raised the alarm about the incident, also died from internal injuries resulting from radiation exposure. After her death, Leide das Neves Ferreira's body was found to be highly contaminated and had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin. The Goiânia incident has since been acknowledged as one of the worst cases of radioactive contamination in history, despite there being no recorded cases of cancer in the local population as a result of the incident.